Hi, I'm Ranger Mara at Shenandoah National Park. Welcome to the third in our series of virtual programs celebrating wildflowers in Shenandoah National Park. And this spring, as the leaves are starting to come out at the lower elevations first, that's where we're tending to see the wildflowers. As those leaves unfurl, they'll shade out the flowers. So these flowers are trying to bloom now before they get shaded out. And as we go along through the spring, we'll be seeing more and more wildflowers going farther and farther up in elevation in the park. Madison Run Fire Road is called that because it's right along Madison Run. That's the stream here to my left. We've had a lot of rain lately, and so there's a lot of water coming down those streams. That water is very important to a lot of the life in our park, including wildlife and plants. So the flowers that you're seeing today are really coming out because of the recent rains that we've just had. So we'll take a look as we go and see how many wildflowers we can find today. I've got a couple down here that we just noticed. I will say that because we're on the boundary, when you're walking along in the park, you may notice some paint marks on the trees. And today you will see some red marks. Those are the boundary lines. So the side of the tree that you're looking at has the mark on it, and whatever is behind that is the park boundary. So be careful, when you're walking, so you know if you're on private property or on park property. Other paint marks that you'll see on trees will be our paint blazes that mark different kinds of trails. They'll be marked blue for most of our hiking trails, white for the Appalachian Trail, and yellow for trails that horses are allowed on. So let's go and see what kind of wildflowers we can find today on the Madison Run Fire Road. We've got a nice patch of chickweed here. This is star chickweed. It's a native woodland flower, and it grows in these lovely bouquets, a large amount of flowers in one place. And this is a low-growing plant. It's related to the chickweeds that you have in your lawns at home, but those are not native. This is a native plant that's always been up here in the mountains, and it's just a beautiful little flower. Looks like it has 10 petals, but they're really 5 deeply cleft petals, and that's just an indication of the family that it's in. The chickweed is in the pink family, and that means those are flowers whose edges of their petals are either short or deeply cleft or cut, and that's pinking is another way of cleaving the edge of something. So these are star chickweeds, a member of the pink family, and they're pretty abundant right now in the lower elevations in the park. Another pretty spring wildflower that comes up in bouquet forms where there's a lot of flowers in one is the bluette, or we should say bluettes, because you never just see one bluette flower, but they're beautiful low blue flowers with a yellow center. Also called Quaker ladies for some reason, I don't know why, but they're just a beautiful 4-petaled low-growing flower, and we look forward to seeing those in the spring. Bluettes are one of the longer lasting flowers, so they'll continue to bloom for weeks and weeks. And even though they're just starting now at the lower elevations, we'll be seeing them all the way up into the park, probably throughout the month of April and into May and beyond. So look for bluettes in the park when you're hiking. Well, we're walking up the Madison Run Fire Road today from the park boundary, and this road is an old road. It was here before the Civil War in the 1860s, and it was known as the Browns Gap Road. And many Army troops from both sides passed over the mountains on this road. Can you imagine? All of those people and equipment and horses and artillery and everything moving up and down this road, all the noise it would be making, and compare that today with the gentle sounds of the Madison Run off to our right, maybe some birds now and then. Quite a different place a long time ago. For a minute I thought it was snowing, but it's actually the petals of these serviceberry flowers. This is one of our early spring blooming trees, the serviceberry, and it will have little fruits on it later on. Beautiful, welcoming tree of springtime. Behind it, you will see some yellowish flowers all through the woods and along the road here too, and those are the flowering dogwood trees. Those are native trees as well, and their flowers are just beginning to open. When you look closely at a dogwood flower, what you see are not the flowers that are the big petal-like pieces, but those are bracts, and the flowers are actually little tiny flowers right inside those bracts. So the actual flowers may not be blooming, but those yellowish bracts have just opened up. Flowers will be blooming pretty soon, any time now. There's a beautiful native flower growing right here along the bank. And this is a special one because we don't see it that often. So this is a violet. Violets are pretty common, right? But most of the violets we see are your typical blue violets, your common blue violet. And they'll usually have a heart-shaped leaf. Most violets in the park do. But this is a different one. This is called the birdfoot violet. And its leaves are much narrower. They look a little more like a crowfoot. That's how they got their name. And they've got this beautiful little yellow, you can see the anthers where the pollen is in the center under this little white eye. Sometimes the birdfoot violets will be all purple, like this one, or they'll have pale purple petals on the bottom and dark purple petals on the top. So 2 dark purple and 3 pale purple. So if we see any more that look like that, we'll stop and show you. But this is just gorgeous as it is, the birdfoot violet. Okay, let's keep walking and see what we can see. Great little garden here of native wildflowers. The largest ones that you see here are called wild pinks, and you notice that some of them are white, some of them are pink. And again, these are members of the pink family, just like the star chickweed, and that means that the edges of their petals are toothed or notched, and that's where that pinking comes in. So they're members of the pink family. So wild pink, one of the larger members of that family that you'll see in the springtime. Very pretty, low to the ground. And also in this little bouquet of spring wildflowers, we've got some more of our birdfoot violets growing among them. And right here, this little tall white one, this is pussy toes. Pussy toes is a nice fuzzy flower. It has male and female flowers on separate plants. And they usually grow in little clusters, so all female plants in one cluster, and then nearby there will be male pussy toe flowers. And the female flowers are kind of rounded at the top. They're white, very, very fuzzy. And the leaves are very close to the ground, kind of a grayish green, so it's a little bit different shade than the other green leaves that you're going to see. So that's pussy toes. But you can see all of these lovely things in this little garden bouquet right here, as well as these little plants I just noticed. These are blueberries, and they're just starting to get their flower buds. So their flowers will be small, white, lantern-shaped flowers, very attractive to little tiny bees that are solitary bees. A lot of our native bees are solitary, and they're just the right size to go up in those little lantern flowers of the blueberries and pollinate them. So quite a little group of wildflowers growing here in this one little bankside garden. Here's a native flower that we don't see everywhere in the park. This is one of the few places that I have seen it. It's called lupin, L-U-P-I-N-E, and it will have a tall bunch of flowers that kind of hang down. They'll be purple, both light and dark purple, beautiful flowers. And they have these distinctive palmate leaves that look like your fingers spread out on your hand, just like this. And in this group right here, I found one little bud coming up way back here, but that's going to turn into some flowers in a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks from now. So something to look for on this west side of the park in the kind of farther south end. We're in Rockingham County right now. We've got a nice little group, a clump of daffodils growing here. Now, daffodils are not native to North America. They're not native to the park, but they were favorites of people who lived in the area. And they're a bulb, and they keep coming up year after year after year. So 100 years later, there may still be daffodils coming up where they were planted. These ones seem to be an old-fashioned variety. If you think about your daffodils that you have in your yard today, they have a simple set of petals that are kind of in the back, and then a tube flower that comes out in the front. Well, this one, if you look at it, it's a little flopped over, but it's got the white petals in the back, and then this lovely little ring of like a short yellow cup. And then inside, look at how many petals there are inside. That's called doubled. Instead of just having one set of petals, there are two or many more sets of petals. And that's generally the old-fashioned varieties that you could order from catalogs. I don't know which one this is, but it's a very pretty flower to come across. Even though it's not native, it's kind of really neat to think about, how long ago these might have been planted, who planted them, and just the fact that they're still growing after many, many years. We've got a beautiful flowering tree right here. This is the eastern redbud. If you're driving through the Shenandoah Valley at this time of year, you'll see these trees along the edges of a lot of our country roads. They love to be on the edge of a forest, right by the road, and you can see these ones are growing right by the edge of the fire road here. These are one of the prettiest trees in Virginia. They don't get really tall. They usually get shaded out by other trees eventually, but the flowers come out before the leaves, and that's what makes them so noticeable right now, because there's no green leaves covering up those flowers. Flowers look like little slippers on there. They'll open up, and they're a major attracting plant for bees and other pollinators. So the eastern redbud, beautiful tree, blooming at the lower elevations in the park right now. Well, here we have a different flower. This is a rock-loving plant. It's called moss phlox, P-H-L-O-X. The flowers look a little bit like ones that we saw earlier, the members of the pink family, but they're a different family. They're similar, but they're different. The flowers have a little indentation on the edges, but they're a different family. Moss phlox is called that because the leaves are very small and they look like moss, but they're not moss. They're moss-like. So moss phlox often grows on these boulders at high elevations. We're at a low elevation, and here they are. But you can see how it doesn't take much to make moss phlox happy. They don't need a deep humusy soil to grow in. They're just growing right in the cracks on the rocks. So remember, when you're hiking in the park, when you're looking for wildflowers, to look up and look at the rocks as well, and you may be impressed by what you see there. Thank you for joining me on this third segment in our virtual walks celebrating native woodland wildflowers here in Shenandoah National Park. Next week, we hope to be a little farther up the mountain. As these trees are leafing out down here below, we'll be seeing more flowers as we go up toward the middle portion of the mountain next week. So until then, this is Ranger Mara at Shenandoah National Park. Hello, this is Ranger Mara at Shenandoah National Park. This is our second week out looking for wildflowers in our celebration of our native woodland wildflowers here in the park. At this time of year, the sun is coming through these trees that haven't quite opened up their leaves yet, and that's why these wildflowers have a chance to bloom, because they can get that sunlight. As these leaves begin to open up on the trees, they're going to shade out these wildflowers and they will die back. And then you'll need to go farther up in elevation where the trees haven't leafed out yet to find the wildflowers. So it's a little bit of a race. The flowers are trying to keep ahead of those trees that are leafing out. So we're seeing some wildflowers right here today. This is at the lower elevation in the park. This is one of the lower elevation trails. This is the Rose River Fire Road. So we're at the boundary of the park, and we're going to walk our way up in elevation just a little bit. The first flowers that we're seeing just as we leave the parking lot are some beautiful violets. These are native flowers, and there are many species of violets in the park. The interesting thing is they're not always violet colored. This one is. This is our common blue violet, and it's one of the earlier ones that you will see here. They're an interesting flower. They've got a little bit of a runway for bees and other pollinators to find their way into the back of the plant where the nectar is. They've got this runway that I'm talking about, or a series of little purple stripes on a white background. So it's like they can see that. Here's where you land there and follow those stripes right back to where the nectar is. Meantime, they get some pollen on their body, and the next time they go to a violet flower, they pollinate it. So pretty nice system for the violets. We talked about how violets are not always violet, and we have some yellow ones right here. These are the smooth yellow violets, and they're a little bit smaller, and they're growing and opening right at about the same time as our common blue violets. So as we go along today, we'll see if we can see any other colors of violets. We also have some white violets in the park, so we'll look for some of those as well. One of the flowers that I really look forward to in the springtime is star chickweed. And it's because it's one of the earlier native woodland flowers, but it also comes in a nice woodland bouquet. So it's like this, nature is saying, here, look at this, and you just can't help it. You have to look. Star chickweed is related to the chickweeds that you might have growing in your lawns at home. But those ones are not native. Those are from other places outside of the U.S. The star chickweed is a native woodland flower. And what's cool about it is it looks like from a distance it's got 10 petals, these little white petals here, but there are actually only 5. and they're just very deeply cut, and so it looks like 10. And that helps you to know what family of flowers the star chickweed is in. This is in a family called the pink family, and that doesn't have anything to do with the color. Pinking is a way of cutting or making a cleft into something. If you're if you like to do sewing, you may have some pinking shears at home, and those have a zigzag tooth on them, and that's pinking. That's kind of cutting a cleft in your material all the way across. So these are members of the pink family, even though they're not pink. We have another beautiful flower that is one of my favorites growing right nearby the star chickweed here, and that is called Dutchman's Breeches, and that's right over here. It will have stems of flowers that are hanging down like someone hung out their bloomers on a line. And so Dutchman's Breeches, beautiful white flowers, and they only bloom in the springtime, as our other woodland ephemerals like star chickweed. These ephemerals, it means that they are only here for a short time and then they go away. And these flowers are only here in the springtime, and they will try to get pollinated. The flowers will then fall off, the petals will fall off, the seeds will form, and then you won't see those flowers again until next spring. So these are only here for a short time, and that's why it's great to come and look for them in the springtime right now. When you're out for a stroll in the park, it's good to watch where you're putting your feet. Sometimes there will be things nearby that you won't even notice because they're not necessarily blooming, but they're going to bloom later. So look closely as you walk slowly, and you'll see more. And when I was walking slowly, I saw some beautiful little umbrellas, green umbrellas poking up out of the ground, and these mayapple plants are not ready to bloom yet. They won't be blooming for about another month, but they're just starting to come up, so it's kind of cool to take a look at them. And here they are right here, starting to open up. They'll come starting like this, just pushing up like looks like a mushroom coming up, but they're green, and they're not mushrooms, of course. They're green plants, and you'll see several of them here coming up. And as the weeks go by, they will begin to unfurl those umbrella-like leaves at the top, and underneath there will be a single creamy, waxy white flower hanging down. There may be two on a plant, and those won't be blooming, as I said, for another month or so. But here they are, just coming out of the ground though, so watch where you put your feet when you're looking for wildflowers. We have another one of my favorite spring flowers here, and I guess I should say at this point that they're all my favorites. So this one is called bloodroot. It's got a beautiful white flower, and if you look at the stem, the leaf is behind the stem and is kind of curled around, and that's what the leaf does. As that flower is coming up in the bud, the leaf will wrap around almost in a protective way, and as the flower stem continues to grow up and open, the leaf will pull back. Bloodroot gets its name because under the ground its root is a fairly thick root, and when it's broken open, will release a reddish kind of a dye, and people use that actually for a dye. Now that I've said that, I want to make sure that nobody's going out there and digging up our bloodroot plants or any other flowers. In Shenandoah National Park, all of our wildflowers are protected, so please leave them where they are. Purchase your wildflowers from reputable dealers, catalogs, etc., but do not dig them up in national parks. In addition to this beautiful bloodroot right here beside me, there's a group of them also growing behind me. And while I sat here, I noticed, just looking down on this side, there's a stem coming up with 3 equal-sized leaflets coming out at the same place, and it's the stem of a trillium, the large-flowered trillium. They're not blooming yet, but this one is several inches tall, and in another week or two there will be a beautiful white flower, one of the prettiest flowers in the park, one of the largest of our native woodland wildflowers. But the trilliums aren't blooming yet, so wait another week or so and you'll start to see those. We found a nice wildflower right here behind this log. This is called the cutleaf toothwort. This is another native woodland wildflower, just starting to bloom. It's toothwort because the leaves are very narrow and they've got little teeth on the edges of them. And wort is just another name for a plant. And this toothwort is actually a member of the mustard family. Mustard flowers can be different colors. There's many different types of mustards out there. The toothworts show that they're a member of the mustard family. If you look closely at the open flower, they only have 4 petals. And the majority of flowers that you're going to see out there will have 5 or more petals. So 4 is kind of an unusual number in wildflowers, but members of the mustard family will have 4. Something else that's interesting about the toothwort is that it is the larval host plant for one of our native butterflies here in the park, the West Virginia white. It's an uncommon butterfly, and its caterpillars depend on the leaves of toothwort and will eat those before they metamorphose into adult butterflies. As adult butterflies can only sip nectar. They can't eat anymore. They don't have chewing mouth parts. But so they'll drink nectar from a variety of plants. But as a caterpillar, the West Virginia white needs toothwort. What's happening, though, in many of our forests across the eastern U.S. is that a non-native plant called garlic mustard has come in and become invasive. That means it's taken over some places where our native plants are also growing and will crowd them out. And so sometimes the West Virginia white butterfly is fooled into laying its eggs on the garlic mustard instead of the toothwort. And those caterpillars, when they hatch out and feed on the garlic mustard, they will never survive long enough to become adults. So it is a problem where our already uncommon butterflies are having their populations impacted by an invasive plant that wasn't a native plant that was here a long time. So look for toothwort. There's still plenty of it here in our national parks. Sometimes when you're walking in the woods, you might not see an animal or a bird, but you may see evidence that they were here. So we have some evidence right here of some bird activity. This tree apparently died. I don't know when or how, but later on there will be insects that will go inside there and live and make their homes, and then our woodpeckers will go in there and try to get those insects out. And our largest woodpecker, the pileated woodpecker, is very good at chipping big holes into trees to go after those insects. And you can see the evidence at the base of the tree and all of those wood chips that it pulls out in order to get to those insects inside. So there was a nice big meal in there for some pileated woodpecker. A fallen tree across the trail may look like an obstacle and just be something for you to step over. But if you stop and take a look, you can see the whole cycle of life going on. What's happening in this forest is happening right here on this fallen tree. If you look closely, you may see a blue-green color, and that's not a dye that anybody has put on that log. This is a fungus, and that's its natural color. It's called a blue-green stain or just a blue-green fungus. And it will respond to moisture. It really likes when it rains and the moisture begins to soften this tree, that fungus just goes right in there and starts to work and continues to soften and break down the fibers in that tree. While that's happening, there are beetles that are living in that tree, and they're eating it from the inside. And if you look closely at the log, you may see what we call galleries, which are little channels that the beetles make, and they're all different artistically designed squiggles on this log. And if you look a little farther, you might see some channels that are deeper and wider, and those are made by woodpeckers that are going after those insects that are inside that log. So this is a full gallery of things that are happening here in the woods, and eventually, and not too long from now, this rotting tree is going to become part of the soil and help to provide nutrients for more flowering plants that you can see when you come to visit the park in the springtime. Well, thanks for joining us today on our second wildflower walk. Now, today you might have noticed that we saw some of the same flowers that we saw last week, but last week the flowers were just starting to open up, and this week we saw a lot more fully open flowers and flowers that were blooming a little farther up in elevation. Join me next week for our third episode, where we'll be at another boundary trail in the park, and I'll just bet you that there will be some more flowers blooming, more variety, and a lot more in numbers. So until then, this is Ranger Mara at Shenandoah National Park.